A rash of pretty serious allegations have emerged against John Weaver, formerly of the Lincoln Project. Let's put the New York Times reporting here up on the screen. 21 men have come out to accuse Lincoln Project co-founder John Weaver of online harassment. Sagar, these were usually young gay men who were interested in politics, and the allegations here are that Weaver tried to use his position of power to coerce these young men.
Yeah, that's right. So here to discuss, a president and founder of Solidarity Strategies, former senior advisor for the Sanders campaign, and author of T.O. Bernie himself, Chuck Rocha, and the White House correspondent for Real Clear Politics, Philip Wegman. Chuck, let me start with you on this story. Obviously, it's terrible. The allegations, John Weaver has been disavowed now by the Lincoln Project, saying he thought that many of the conversations were mutually and that he's been living a deeply closeted life, in his own words. All of that being said, what does this say about the Democratic Party's flirtation with the Lincoln Project and how central they really were to its kind of online national messaging, and especially in the light of the fact that we now know with research that many of the ads that they ran did not even work in terms of trying to get Republicans to vote for Joe Biden?
I think you have to kind of dissect this in lots of ways. I think one is you probably can't say that this guy who had disgusting things that he was doing to young men is an attribute to some strategy that a organization was doing. We can have that debate, and let's have that debate about how effective the Lincoln Project was, the ads that they made, and how I would say liberal donors gave them a lot of money. I take that from a Latino who ran a Latino super PAC who begged, borrowed, and steal to raise $8 million trying to elect Democrats across the board, while the Lincoln Project, and I give them credit, went out and got a bunch of donors to give them like $30 or $40 million. Now, the one thing I will say about the Lincoln Project that I find really interesting, you can debate whether their ads worked for working class folks in targeted areas. But the one thing that I've always liked that I thought the Democrats didn't do very well is we always run the same milquetoast commercial from the same polling messaging firm, from the same group talking about pre-existing conditions, when the Lincoln Project really wasn't scared to go out and put out some ads that were pretty breathtaking. Whether they worked or not, Democrats would never do that because that ain't what we do. And I think we get back to doing some of that would help us win back more races in 2022.
On the ad front, I'm fine with the aggressive nature of the ads. The research showed they just weren't effective. So they clearly were on the wrong message with that aggressive messaging. But Philip, to get back to the issue at hand here, I mean, here's some of the details. His solicitation, I'm reading from the New York Times reporting now, included sending messages to a 14-year-old, and not like in the distant past, like in the very recent past, asking questions about his body while he was still in high school, and then more pointed ones after he turned 18. He said that he told one man he would spoil you when we see each other. He's always holding out these sort of like positions in politics to these young men to try to get them to coerce them potentially for sexual favor. These are all the allegations here. And again, he's denied that he did anything to it. Well, he did say that it was inappropriate, but said that he thought it was consensual, et cetera, et cetera. I guess the big question here, Philip, is like, it seems like this was kind of an open secret in Republican circles. You have some of these young men, when they would describe the abuse to others within political circles, they would guess that it was John Weaver. This was clearly, allegedly a pattern of behavior here, just judging by the number of young men that have come forward, 21 now, who came forward to the New York Times to say, yes, this happened to me too. How does behavior like this stay, a secret in Washington for so long?
Yeah, it's an embarrassing question for anyone on the right, because even looking at that New York Times story, the allegations were made public on Twitter and then in a separate magazine article weeks earlier. And there's a problem when the immediate response is, oh, well, this was an open secret. How many awful, disgusting open secrets do people on the right have to contend with? And this is what is so embarrassing for folks at the Lincoln Project. Their central premise was that they were going to be the conscience for Republicans at a moment when Republicans had lost theirs. And so they are going to lose all credibility if they cannot show that they are willing also to take responsibility to clean up their own house. And so far, the statements that they have put out, that they had no idea that any of this was going on, those seem hard to believe.
Yeah, and Phil, let me just follow up on that, which is that, our friend of our show, Ryan Gerdusky, I mean, he wrote an article about this weeks ago in the American Conservative. It was openly he was talking about it. And to your point, somebody went back and found a 2004 piece in the Atlantic in which Karl Rove apparently told everybody about how John Weaver had made a pass at a young man at a past Republican convention, and they described it as a vicious smear and as a lie. So it seems that people in Washington have known about this for what is that, almost 20 years ago, or not 15 years ago now. And it's only after the New York Times even reported it that the Lincoln Project felt like they needed to disavow it. You see, denials from George Conway, for example, this morning being like, I barely knew the guy, basically. I mean, he co-wrote an op-ed with Weaver not that long ago. So they're trying their best to make it seem like they didn't know what was going on. But at the very least, these allegations have been surfacing for at least a month, and they have not grappled with it.
Yeah, they're going to try and memory hole this. And perhaps they had no idea who the real John Weaver was. Maybe they didn't hear about all of these allegations going back to 2004, like you just mentioned, or the Ryan Gerdusky magazine article that you just mentioned. But that makes you wonder if donors are going to trust these guys with tens of millions of dollars. Wouldn't you think that the responsible thing to do would know who you were going into business with? If you're Conway or Rick Wilson or any of those other guys, wouldn't you think that the basic due diligence is to make certain that the person that you're working with is of upstanding character before you go attack an entire party for not being of upstanding character? I mean, this stuff is gross. And frankly, from a journalistic perspective, it's really disappointing that the New York Times, had to finally weigh in and to get people to pay attention when this was clearly out there before.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Chuck, what do you make of that piece of it? Because I'll be honest with you, I don't know very many people in the Republican establishment in Washington. And even I had heard some whisperings about John Weaver. Like, is it plausible to believe that people as enmeshed within the firmament of the Republican establishment as Rick Wilson and Steve Schmidt really truly had zero clue that any of this was happening?
It reminds me of a lesson that I learned early on coming to Washington, D.C. and being in powerful places. Crystal, me and you've actually talked about this years ago about how intimidating that is for, a farm boy from East Texas in these very, very powerful places. Donald Trump was a great example of how rich men, rich people, rich women get away with things because they are rich and powerful. And it almost, you can watch it like go to their head where they feel like they're inevitable. I'm not speaking for Mr. Weaver or anybody else. I'm just saying what I personally witnessed being in powerful circles and working in environmental groups, working in labor groups, working against these kind of folks. When you were in meetings with them, you could see the arrogance of there was no repercussions and some of the language that I would learn later in life, which is really tempered based off of what they really feel about something, really struck me to sit back a minute and try to figure out what's really going on. And that's what really sat with me as I read this weekend and actually had conversations with it about my fiance. We would have these conversations about in these powerful places, folks really feel like there's no repercussions because they've never had to have any.
That is so true, Chuck. And it's one of the most disgusting and open secrets, or not even open secrets. It's one of the most open parts of the culture here, which I wish more people could understand. Guys, thanks so much for joining us. And we will have more Rising for everybody right after this.